Hi, thank you for attending this seminar about CardioSentinel at Purdue University. I am Kaushik Lodh. I would first like to thank the Honorable Minister of Medical Education, Government of Maharashtra, Honorable Mr. Hassan Mushrif, and the Commissioner of Medical Education, Mr. Anil Bhandari. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhaga Bhavet. The reason we're doing this in India is because traditionally medical research data sets are from Western countries, and we would like to include the Indian physiological characteristics for doing this cardiovascular disease research. We are going to be compliant as per the US Food and Drug Administration 21 Code of Federal Regulations 820, which is completely compatible with the European Medical Association ISO 13485. We are going to be using ISO 4971 risk management, which I, as a Six Sigma Master Black Belt, feel is the best form of managing the risk and risk control across the device lifecycle. We're going to have design controls and validation, and a very robust CAPA framework. And lastly, we're going to be compliant with the IEC 60601 safety regulations. We are going to be using the AAMI HE75 US regulatory expectations for human factors and usability engineering. We acknowledge that the three main failure pathways are either through design or manufacturing flaw, inadequate training, and lastly, real-world stress during usage. It can be through fatigue, urgency, cognitive overload in an intensive care unit or an operating theater. We are going to have a complete protocol-based front-end research, contextual inquiry in real environments, iterative prototype cycle, and design refinement outcome. We are going to adhere to all the relevant patient privacy and data protection laws in the United States and India. The laws are stated over here. I want to start off with a very sad case, which shows the failure of episodic testing. Very respected neurosurgeon Chandrasekhar Pakmode passed away recently in Jan 2026, and ministers up to the union level, Mr. Nitin Gadkari and the Revenue Minister, Mr. Bawankule, expressed dismay at his passing. He was 53 years old, and according to the Government Medical College and Hospital's Medical Superintendent, Mr. Dr. Gawande, his ECG done 3 days ago was completely normal. When the episode happened, despite immediate intervention by his medical doctor wife, Dr. Manisha Pakmode, and a team of cardiologists, they failed to resuscitate him even after 2 hours of effort. This just goes to show that episodic testing may not be enough to identify deep underlying problems. The current crisis is the fragmented data and lost context. As we mentioned, patient interactions occur as isolated encounters with minimal continuity across visits or institutions. We're looking at static snapshots. Clinical data is captured as a single point and lacking deeper physiological context. Longitudinal tracking and absence of structured follow-ups, scheduled diagnostics, and standardized monitoring protocols further make the problem worse. Let us take a look at a patient over here, how the loss of temporal context causes small changes over time, and the consequences are pretty big. If you look at her diagnostics 2 years ago, 1 year ago, and today, you will see that it has deteriorated significantly. But if this patient was to be looked at with an episodic perspective, given broader demographic values, it might be conjectured that she is not doing so badly, but when you look at it from the longitudinal perspective, you understand that there has been serious decline over the period of time and intervention needs to happen. Also, there is disconnected risk modeling. Critical variables remain unlinked, and early disease cannot be reliably modeled without full integration of these variables, such as genetic predisposition, disease progression, as we mentioned, comorbidities, environmental factors, and of course, the behavior of the patient himself. lifestyle changes, things like that. Time matters, trends tell the truth. Some technical challenges which are there would be infrastructure limitations. Many healthcare institutions lack the storage, computing capabilities, personnel required to manage high volume data streams from different data sources such as ECG, waveforms, imaging, etc. There is deficiency in extracting the data from rich physiological signals such as ICDs, Holter monitors, etc. And there's a lack of cross-referencing systems and lack of scalable mechanism to correlate patient-specific data with established clinical markers and thresholds to trigger early warnings or clinical review. But as the Happy Bear says, there is a solution. So let us have, for example, a point of entry wherein the standardized intake of the patient happens with the demographics, baseline clinical information through digital interfaces. This can be done at a kiosk supported by a nurse or by the means of an app that the patient has. And then we have scheduled follow-ups, protocol-driven screening for chronic conditions such as atherosclerosis, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, valvular disease, recognizing that these are progressive, multi-year processes requiring periodic evaluation. And we also would like to have scheduled diagnostic inputs such as laboratory markers of HbA1c, liver function, kidney function tests, thyroid panel, CBC, B-type natriuretic peptide, troponin, lipid profile tests, ECG, MRI, and CT scans as needed. The ECG signal pipeline, efficient capture, processing, and storage. Integration with the ECG systems would ensure that we're able to ingest the raw device-level ECG data, process this ECG data using advanced algorithms in order to extract the key diagnostic features with very low data footprint, and feature-based storage only. Extract the relevant medical diagnostic information and store that. Have a 90% size reduction in the amount of data that has to be stored, and then use this data for waveform reconstruction using interpolation techniques and reverse transforms. So to explain this point a little bit better, let's take a look, for example, an ECG machine that would generate typically gigabytes of data when looking at multiple patients over a period of time, and the hospitals just don't have the facility to store this amount of data. So let us say that, with CardioSentinel processing power, we would be using advanced algorithms such as NeuroKit-2, where we would be significantly we'd be extracting the key diagnostic data points and reducing the size of data that has to be stored by almost 90%, reducing the load on the hospital for the amount of data to be stored, the amount of processing that needs to be done, the computing power it needs, and the staff needed to manage this data. And this would essentially mean high fidelity visual ECG would be available to the doctor on demand based on, to be stored in the database. So even if the doctor wants to see something from 2 years ago, 1 year ago, or whatever, because it is stored with very little amount of space, kilobytes instead of gigabytes, the original ECG from 2 years ago can be reconstructed and they can be compared. And more clarity will come on this point as we move to the next slide. Let us say, for example, if that digital version of the ECG does not exist, and if the image exists, then we have the necessary software to be able to take the image, convert that into the key data points, and use our algorithms to store it in a similar manner. This has been explained by this diagram over here. Image to data conversion, digitizing ECG records for secure cardiac research. So let us just focus on the ECG. How much actual ECG data is coming from a hospital? According to official statistics, just the Grand Medical College Sir J.J. Hospital sees around 5,000 patients per day and has an average of 150 patients in the ICU. Realistically, 35% of the OPD patients would require a routine ECG for a duration from 10 seconds to 1 minute, whatever, with a 12-lead ECG for diagnostic purposes. And 100% of the ICU patients, which are going to be under 24-hour constant monitoring with a 5-lead ECG. So how much is that in terms of data? For the 5,000 patients, considering 35% of them requiring an ECG, with the 12-lead system, data per ECG would be around 1.4 megabytes. So in a day, given the number of patients, it would be around 2.45 gigabytes. And in a year, that would be 900 gigabytes worth of data. That would just be the raw data, and that has to be indexed. That has to be additional information attached to it for the patient demographic and everything else, and that increases the data by almost 3 times. And then we have to have the processing power required to go through this entire data. And now let us take a look at the ICU patients who are being monitored 24 hours a day. Let us say 150 patients per day, and so that would be 500 megabytes per patient per day. So with the 150 patients, that would come to 75 gigabytes of data, or 27 terabytes of data in a year. Again, this number would be tripled or quadrupled if we add the other information about the demographics, the comorbidities, the blood test results, yada 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 to it, and you have and you see with the total big picture from the OPD patients and the ICU patients, you have a very large chunk of data which needs to be stored, processed, and made available on demand to the clinician within the few minutes that he has to see the patients on an everyday basis. So this poses a very big challenge for computing power for a government hospital. So the solution is that, the raw input storage heavy reality, to start the process, the CardioSentinel system that we are proposing would have a high resolution ECG signal. Let's just take an example. And this, for example, is a 3-second snapshot captured at 500 Hertz. We have annotated the PQRST waveform showing that although the complex morphology is present, the signal is bulky. Here is the signal. Standard PQRST waveform. Now, if we use a NeuroKit 2 extracted feature set in real time, instead of storing the continuous voltage stream, we ignore the baseline redundancy and focus only on the coordinates of interest for us. We delineate the boundaries of the cardiac cycle, calculate the specific durations and amplitudes highlighted. The output shown, as you see below, is a screenshot of the digital vector that CardioSentinel actually stores in the database instead of thousands of samples. Now we have a clean table listing only the key metrics like RR intervals, QRS durations, ST deviations for consecutive heartbeats. This transformation reduces the data footprint by over 90%, as we've said before. So this is the table. The clinician can use this table alone for making the diagnostic decisions, but we have one feature better than that, which is a reconstruction. When the clinical review is requested, the system must regenerate a visually high-fidelity ECG using only the compressed vector data from step 2. The visualization below we will show the side-by-side comparison on a clinical monitor interface. To the left side, you will see the original raw signal, which is in a faint gray-blue color, and on the right side, you will see the reconstructed signal purely by running a smooth algorithm like cubic spline interpolation to connect the extracted coordinate points in the table. So to the left, you have the original noisy raw ECG signal. To the right, you have the brand new waveform made by the cubic spline interpolation method. And note how the green reconstructed waveform maintains the complex morphology and timing of the original signal, proving mathematical integrity is maintained despite the drastic compression. Arrows highlight how specific numbers from the stored data table now define the shape of the visual ECG. So we're taking the data from the table and reconstructing the ECG for the purposes of diagnosis. The extraneous data is removed, the size is compressed by 90%, and voila, you have a solution to the large data that is being produced in the hospital every day, and you are still able to save all the data for the patient and have a very life-saving protocol in place. And now going to the next step for the very, very, very high-value data, which would be the Holter monitors, the ICDs, the ambulatory telemetry devices, etc. We consider them to be to enhance the temporal resolution and detect intermittent abnormalities. And this would also be something of very high interest to us for storing and compressing and making it available to the clinicians over time. So, as the Happy Bear indicates, we do have an execution strategy, and we believe in the paradigm of structure precedes prediction and systematic structure saves lives. One of my very interesting experiences when I was working with infant healthcare was my series of meetings with Dr. Hannah Kinney from Harvard Med School. And she is an expert on SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, which is an autonomic nervous system disease. And but somehow the crib death fight in the United States, which was led by her, created by her, in fact, it focused on simple structured message of a crib without pillows, toys, clutter, or co-parents sleeping. And this reduced the fatalities by almost 75% or even more. So she did not need the public to understand the complexities of the autonomic nervous system failure to save millions of infants. She just provided a framework for safety. Ultimately, lives matter. And in the same vein, we acknowledge that even before our main objective, which is the full AI prediction system to be achieved, the simple act of structured monitoring and regular screenings can save millions of lives. This structured approach delivers immediate clinical value, independent of advanced AI deployment, and operates entirely within existing regulatory and institutional frameworks. And this structured monitoring and regular screening will provide us with the data and indeed the impetus to take it to the next generation of scientific achievement of artificial intelligence-aided predictive modeling. So let's take a look at the core architecture itself. Like we said before, we would have the unified health identity layer, which would have the demographics linked with the comorbidities, medications, etc. We would have standardized operability, architected for full compatibility with any national framework. For example, in India, there is the ABHA, using the HL7 fast healthcare interoperability resources for data exchange, and DICOM ECG standards for waveform metadata, which basically means that this would be vendor independent, plug and play in any hospital system across the country. The data source acquisition would be dual source from the clinical machines that we mentioned, like the ECG, Holter monitor, diagnostics, etc. And it could also be uploaded, the historical data that the patient might have. He can just take a picture of it and upload it to our database using PDF or an image. And we would have data quality gatekeepers in place to ensure that the quality of data that we're getting is completely up to our standards. Temporal restructuring, we will be having temporal structuring. There would be a clinical focus on detecting disease progression, circadian variations, etc. Physiological signals and feature extraction, like we mentioned, we would prioritize ECG, Holter monitor, the ICD, temporal devices, and vital sign streams for deep analysis. And then we would have the pilot implementation model, and we would be deploying it at departmental level. For example, the cardiology department where the ECG unit is stationed, and we would be operating on existing hospital infrastructure. The data governance would be completely on the spot. All identifiable data will remain within the originating hospital. Operational learning and UX evaluation, as we mentioned, will be AAMI HE75 compliance, or collect feedback from clinical staff regarding workflow integration and alert fatigue. And iterative refinement would mean pilot findings are used to tune the data quality gatekeeper and feature extraction sensitivity. So this is essentially how the implementation framework would look. These are the 7 points that we mentioned right now, and this is how the feed forward and back paths would look. One more note that I want to introduce is that eventually down the line, we hope to be including NVDIA Hopper Blackwell Tensor Core architecture that provides hardware-rooted encryption and secure enclave processing for sensitive data during analysis. These safeguards specifically are designed to protect healthcare records, and they're actively in use, not solely at rest or in transit. So these are the ultimate levels of patient privacy protection, and these in fact open the door to a lot more research possibilities using patient data. The system anatomy. What would the operational infrastructure actually look like? In physical terms, what would be the hardware required? I foresee that there will be the clinical ingestion kiosk that I've shown in the image, a dedicated terminal at the cardiology OPD ward, where it would connect through hardware to the ECG machine to capture raw signals and, of course, to enter in patient information, etc. The patient vigilance app, a lightweight mobile interface for longitudinal data entry by the patient. He can enter his comorbidities, medications, if he's taking the medications and not, symptoms, lifestyle factors, diet, circadian rhythms, etc. And lastly, of course, the Secure Data Vault, a centralized hospital governed database which merges the clinical ECG features with the patient reported data to create the golden longitudinal record that we have been talking about. And all these eventually would come in the form of a clinical dashboard which would basically provide a high fidelity visualization to the clinician, trend analysis, and point in time reconstruction. So, for example, one of my heroes, I've taken his name, Tanaji Malusare. We have his health ID, of course, like the picture and the name, are just to illustrate a point over here, for adherence to data, patient privacy, everything else. This will be modified, but we have the health ID, the age, the demographic information, what kind of diseases have been diagnosed, obesity, medications, what he's taking. You'll see on the right side of the image. And then you have the ECG and the HRV, and you have the pathology results, the HbA1c, LDL, HDL, serum creatinine, and then the lifestyle aspects, the ECGs over the, and if you click on, for example, the ECG, you can take a look at the 2 years ago, April 2024, April 2025, March 2026, and you can compare them. You also have the tabular format from the NeuroKit2 vectors, and you have the information available in real time to the doctor with the click of a button. And this would be done for all patients. This would enable the diagnosis and treatment of a patient in a much, much better way. That's what we feel. So the economic rationale, the low capital expenditure pilot, maximizing public health return on existing infrastructure. It will utilize existing hospital PCs, legacy ECG machines, significantly reducing the capex. The data's footprint savings will be reducing the amount of data requirement, storage requirement by 90% with our advanced algorithms. The cost of inaction versus prevention. Avoided admissions, early detection of deterioration prevents high-cost ICU stays and emergency interventions. I have myself seen parents like begging hospitals for an ICU bed for their child, or children begging for an ICU bed for their parent, but we all know that those are not available in large numbers. So this would solve a major problem over there. System efficiency, automated feature extraction saves hundreds of hours of manual report filing for hospital staff. Scalable subscription logic, this pilot establishes a proof of value that can be scaled from one department to more departments in a hospital, and more hospitals within a city, and for more cities within the state, and so on. Evolution of intelligence, from structured monitoring to prediction-driven care. Phase 1 would be the structured clinical intelligence, which we anticipate will take from 0 to 24 months. The foundation would be the longitudinal integration of the ECG labs and diagnostics into a unified patient profile, shift the focus from isolated events, episodic, to disease progression trajectories, longitudinal. Operational efficiency would utilize the existing hospital infrastructure, feature-based extraction using advanced algorithms, reduce the amount of storage and compute load, and zero external data transfer, 100% localized processing, adherence to data and patient privacy laws. Outcome, enhanced clinical visibility and proactive risk identification. Phase 2, predictive modeling and decision support using artificial intelligence. We would leverage the structured longitudinal data set that we obtained in Phase 1 to train predictive models. We would thus be able to have early intervention, detect the physiological deterioration before clinical symptoms actually manifest. Data sovereignty models would be trained on hospital-controlled, India-based infrastructure, strict privacy preserve parameters for research, no identifiable data will leave the premises of the hospital. Outcome, a transition from reactive monitoring to prediction-driven care. The Phase 2 will come after the Phase 1, and it is only after approval from all the different concerned authorities. The 24-month horizon, building the foundation for predictive intelligence. The data accumulation milestone goal, establish a high-quality longitudinal data set within 24 months. Outcomes, sufficient data volume and integrity to initiate clinically meaningful AI model development and validation, and establish India as a primary hub for AI-driven cardiovascular research and innovation, leveraging unique real-world data at scale. Thank you for your time and your patience. I'm the creator, Kaushik Lodh, and that is like a picture of my most favorite person in the world, my son. Is 100% disabled and a genius. Thor Polanat Lodh. Thank you. God bless.